Hi, everybody. My name is Denis Zlobin, and I work as audio designer in Ubisoft Red Links. Today, I'm going to tell you about Sound of Trials Rising, focusing on our key learnings and challenges our audio team had. First, a few words about the company I work for. We're called Ubisoft Red Links. We are located in Helsinki, Finland. We've been around since the year 2000. Then 8 years ago, we joined Ubisoft. And I think our games are known for on-point physics-based gameplay. And we also always very closely collaborating with the community. And our studio has over 140 people from over 20 different nationalities. Trials Rising is the latest game we released, and it was developed in very close collaboration with Ubisoft Kiev and Ubisoft Odessa. It was released on 26th of February on PC and all consoles, including Nintendo Switch, on the same day. And first, let's see what all that is about. Have a short video. So that was one level from Trials Rising. And the audio team consisted of 3 people at Red Link side and 1 person in Ubisoft Kiev side. So we had Vili Vitaniemi as lead audio designer, Matti Tuomela as senior audio designer, and myself as audio designer. And we had great code support from Andrei Kovalevsky from Kiev side. The few core pillars we were following with Trials Rising audio. First, Trials is a physics-based game, so we wanted we wanted our audio to feel as physical and responsive as we could. Then Trials is also a hard game. Our slogan actually says "Eat dirt, taste victory." On the hardest levels, players are expected to make like dozens, if not hundreds, of attempts over certain obstacles. So we were really focused on irritation control, making sure that players don't constantly hear the same exact sound. And also, user-generated content is essential part of the Trials experience. Our game is shipped with a very powerful editor where our users can create their own tracks. So we wanted to make sure that the user-created tracks sound all right from the get-go. And I will start with the challenges part. We started working on Trials Rising with good old Fmod designer engine. The reason behind that was because the older Trials games were powered with Fmod designer, and we wanted to safely reuse existing systems and assets we had. But then, somewhere in the middle of production, we got this opportunity to release the game on Nintendo Switch. And Fmod designer did not support Nintendo Switch, being already quite outdated at that time. So we had to migrate from Fmod designer to Fmod Studio. And despite those 2 audio engines are fully compatible on the lower API level, I would say that the core idea and workflow here on those two is so much different, so it took us quite a lot of time to migrate. And I think the biggest challenge here was merging multiple designer projects into one studio project, because again, we wanted to include all of the sound content from previous Trials games into Trials Rising. And I think the key learning here is that, well, it's actually quite obvious, using like outdated and kind of reliable tech might appear safe, but since game development is not like the most predictable field, it can introduce extra risks, and I think we're not gonna ever do anything like that again. That was not the only Switch-related challenge we had. Here are the resources we had for game audio on Switch. And in addition to that, FMod Studio did not support Opus NX format, which Nintendo Switch can decode on hardware level. So we had to rely fully on software and render all audio on software. And the steps we took was, first we limited our audio playback to 32 channels, which essentially means that only 32 mono sounds can be played at the same time. Because of that, we also had to create some system to prioritize sounds to make sure that important sounds are not getting killed or virtualized. Also, we had to completely drop surround support on Nintendo Switch, because with the hardware resources we had, we just couldn't do it. And also the process required lots of content optimization. So first we were dropping some DSP units, like for example, distance-based filtering, which essentially means that on other platforms, further sounds from the listener, they appear quieter and a bit muffled, but on Switch they just appear quieter. And also we were baking lots of layered sounds together. So essentially here you can see Fmod event. On the top it's from PC, and on the bottom it's on Switch. So you might see that the top one consists of like 3 different layers. But since we had quite a big, quite tight channel limitation, and we also wanted to reduce CPU costs per audio event playback, we basically had to merge them all into just like one looping sound. Well, of course, we did not do it for every sound event we had, but for some of them. The next thing I'm gonna tell you about is loudness standards we introduced for our game. Why did we do that? Trials Rising is quite a big game. We have over 100 levels. We have next to 2,000 individual audio events. And by no means we could hand place and tune every sound on every level. So we started looking for ways to optimize this process a bit. And the approach we took is we tried to evaluate the function of every sound event in the gameplay context. And then we grouped them all together based on that function and some attributes like size and like force, intensity, and so on. So all sound events within one group were brought to exactly the same loudness level, and then we started mixing with mixer buses only. And just to give you an example of how it works, for example, we have like laser gun shot, like laser turrets gunshot. And we have a sound of bird flock taken off. Those two would be like very, very different sounds in like nature, reality, whatever. But in context of Trials Rising, we treat them both as medium-sized environmental highlights. So it's something that, quickly drags your attention and then disappears. So we combine them into one group and bring them to the same loudness level. Another example would be, for example, seagull cry and a sound of dripping water pipe. Also, like two very differently sounding events, but for Trials Rising, those both are like small-sized background sounds, so we also treat them, we decide that they have the same function and mix them to the same loudness. And that's a bit simplified version of the mixer bus structure we had. Why simplified? It's because, each of those subgroups on the second level, they actually divided into those smaller ones with like size and intensity. I just didn't include those smaller groups for each of them because just for the sake of clarity. And the process itself was a bit of trial and error because, we first decided on that structure. We made a quick and dirty mix of our game. We started playing it, then we started observing that, all right, this doesn't sound okay. So we were moving certain sounds to different groups, for example. Or maybe just creating entirely new groups like this hums and buzzes thing. We made it for things like air ventilation sounds, for example, or electric buzzes. We first treated them as background environment objects, but they just appeared too loud and not very natural in that context. So we created an own group for all of them. And the outcomes. Honestly, that system was quite a lifesaver for us, because the first game started kind of mixing itself. When level designers finish placing objects on the level and enable sound, the level already sounded all right. Of course, it required some more detail and polish, but it wasn't like it wasn't blank. It was like maybe 60 to 70% ready. So it saved us a lot of time. Also, our users, players who design their own tracks in Trials Editor have less struggle sound designing their own levels because they also sound kind of okay from the get-go. And also the flexible mixing bus system we created allowed us customizing the mix for different platforms and speaker setups. And that's actually the next thing I'm going to tell you about. For Trials games, previous ones, they all supported surround audio, but they were not mixed in surround from the beginning. Which means that if you had a surround system at home, you could play Trials and they would work there, but it was not ideal because it was not mixed that way. And we always wanted to mix Trials fully in surround. And that's how we got new audio rooms in our studio. So that's the revision of workplaces we got. Like on the left is how it has been like around maybe 2 years ago. And on the right, how our workplaces look now. Each sound designer has this nice, small, acoustically treated room with surround speaker setup, like fully soundproof and isolated. So, and it enabled us to mix Trials Rising in surround in 7.1. And that was our loudness level for all the mixes we had, including Nintendo Switch handheld mode, which was supposed to be louder and like less dynamic. So we made our 7.1 mix to that level. We brought it to minus 24 LUFS. And then when playing on different speaker setups, we started observing weird things. Because, basically the game appeared louder and sound balance was changing a lot, for example, when playing on stereo on PC. And that's a scary thing I have in the middle of my slide. You don't really need to understand that, but that's the downmixing formula for Fmod from 7.1 to stereo for the left channel only. And I think the only thing that you need to understand from it is that L0 value is most likely going to be higher than L. So on average, our stereo mix was like 17% louder, but during some special moments, like close-by explosions, for example, it could get even higher, like up to 200% louder. And of course, we needed to do something about that, and that's how we ended up with 8 different customized mixes for every platform. And we took 2 different approaches here. So for PC 5.1, PC stereo, and Nintendo Switch docked mode, which is the same as PC stereo, we used Fmod Studio's channel mix plugin, which essentially allows to override the formula from the last slide to adjust the amount of sound content we are sending to the down mixer. For consoles like PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, they perform downmix on hardware level, and it's almost all right. It's actually surprisingly good, but still we did some minor adjustments with just mixer bus. We just like slightly remixed them, to bring them all to exactly the same level. And the Switch handheld mode was a different thing because we based it on the Switch docked mode. But then, since we wanted to make it louder to minus 18 LUFS, we basically created entirely new mix with just mixer buses. For example, it has much louder music, and it has a bit quieter explosions and overall lower dynamic range to make sure that users who play with handheld are actually able to hear everything we did. And in fact, that was very quick. That's about it. So sorry if that was a bit too technical, but I'm open to answer the questions if you have any.
So, dear audience, are there any questions you would like to ask Denis?
Yes, please.
Thank you for the great speech. Technical details were very interesting. My question is about not every game developers pay so much attention to the sound of their game as you did. Can you tell where from the idea of making this good quality sound came from the managers or from the developers?
It's a bit hard question because, first Ubisoft, we kind of have quite high standards for everything. So our entire team understands that sound is important and that it needs to be done the right way. Of course, it's quite common in the game development industry that sound is treated as this unbeloved child that kind of needs to be there, but we don't really want to care much about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd say in our studio it was always all right. Of course, we had some struggles and some conversations, and we had to convince the management, for example, like to build us those nice rooms. But overall, I'd say that we are pretty lucky to have very understanding people managing our studio.
So basically, the idea came from you, from developers.
Well,
Initially,
it's kind of both ways, because obviously our studio production director, he really cares about sound and he always wants to improve how our games sound. And we also always push for new tech and for better resources. So it's the process goes from both ends.
okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Denis, thank you very much for a nice talk. You mentioned that there were 4 people dealing on this project with the sound. One was responsible for programming stuff and 3 sound designers.
Yes.
Can you bring more lights, how were areas of responsibilities got it between you and probably on how does it work on other projects?
Okay, well, in Redlinks it's quite flexible, and Redlink's audio team is like a shared asset, so we all work on all Redlinks projects. Specifically on Trials Rising, I was more like the technical sound designer, so I was more in charge of systems and optimizing things. I also did most of the UI sounds, and then for example, all of the bike engines were done by one guy, our senior sound designer Matti, and our audio lead also did quite a lot of level work. So it's not like we have a very strict division, but we have a certain way of giving one sound designer certain feature, and then he kind of owns it.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Come on.
Thank you, Denis, for the nice speech. You mentioned that you have changed your rooms to the real studios. Kind of every person has a studio, yeah?
Yes.
Did you take part in this, or just you outsourced this work?
Wait, do you mean did we build studios ourselves?
Did you help with this?
No.
Like
we
this?
are not acousticians, and we wanted the rooms to be built by professional acousticians, not by sound designers. That's not our field.
That's great, yeah.
So, are there any more questions? Use the opportunity while you have such an awesome person in front of you.
Well, I think if you come up with anything, you can always catch me afterwards somewhere in the venue. I'm still here today. So yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Let's give a big applause to Denis.